All right. Welcome to this episode of Photo Theology. I'm your host, Doug, and today we have another, fun episode of Photo Theology. So we're going to continue this conversation that we've been diving into with the Samsung, NX1. We're going to continue that. The first thing I want to point out, though, is that keep in mind this is a podcast episode. You do not need to sit up here and stare at the screen for an hour and a half. That's not how this works. I know some people, when they do their podcasting and stuff like that, they have you sit up here and watch them act like idiots, in terms of, basically sitting in a chair, laughing and all of the above, and then, conversing among each other so that, you can stay entertained. But the fact is that I want you guys to sit up here and go about doing whatever you're going to do in terms of, post-processing, in terms of a video or, a photo, or, you can sit up here and play chess. I don't care. But you're just to listen to this, just listen to it. Don't try to sit up here and watch it because I'm not going to have anything there to watch. And I purposely made that decision. One of the biggest problems I tend to have with a lot of people that do videos online is their attitude is, here, watch me for the allotted time that you've tuned in on with me so that I can have the attention. Where in some cases, you don't need to do that. Some cases, your words should be able to stand for themselves, and you don't need visuals to stand behind it. This is one of those cases. Hence, that's why normally I do this in a podcast form. It's just that because my base is on YouTube and it is not in a podcast forum, we obviously don't do it in a podcast form at this point in time. But that's cool. I don't have a problem with that. So what we're getting into today is, again, going to be about Samsung. We're going to talk about them. And the reasoning to why I started with Samsung in the first place was, like I had said, they have some controversy going around them. Now, yesterday, when I did the episode, we were talking about the Samsung NX1 and its 28 megapixel BSI sensor. And I didn't actually plan on talking about that for essentially an hour and a half. However, because we went so in depth in the actual aspects of that sensor in terms of how you treat it from a post-processing perspective, how you're able to line it up against like full frame cameras and, crop sensor cameras and stuff like that, and we didn't go like insanely in depth because literally I could have been there like for the next 10 hours talking about that. But, obviously, we gave it some depth. Otherwise it wouldn't have been like an hour and a half. I didn't get to talk about everything I wanted to talk about in terms of the Samsung, the NX1 / the NX500 and the issues surrounding Samsung. So I want to try to hit home on that today. And I thought it was pretty appropriate to actually break the two up as I got so far into the audio of talking about the sensor. Because in that conversation about the sensor and its level of flexibility and what it's able to do and how it's able to sit up here and deliver for the consumer exactly what Samsung envisions their camera being able to do, I thought by the time I got into the meat and potatoes of the sensor that it really made sense to just leave that as its own episode. Because the whole idea is that, when you look at listening to like podcast episodes and stuff like that, you don't want to start on one topic and then, you get lost into another topic when in reality, the focusing of your topic is really grounded at some given point in terms of the point that you really had driven home prior to whatever you jump to next. Even if it's the intended piece or not the intended piece. And in doing podcasting for as long as I have, I've learned that as a lesson, so like, back when I began podcasting, it's kind of funny. In certain other arenas where I had done podcasting that weren't, photography related, by the way, the way it worked was it would be a situation where I would have a main topic, I would talk about that topic for about an hour and a half, and then I would jump on to something else that popped into my head, and then I'd end up having like a 5-hour podcast. I'm not even joking around. Like, literally it'd be five hours long, and people stay tuned to it. I mean, they were in it, you know, they kept with me and stuff. They never wanted it to stop. But I mean, all things have to come to an end, you know. Now back in my earlier days of podcasting, back when I was a much younger man than what I am now, I remember when literally it would be like, you know, I'd start it at 10 and it would end at like 3 a.m. I mean, that's how it would be, you know, and every night people would come and tune in and want to listen and, you know, this, that, and the other. And, you know, it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool. But it wasn't structured, you know, it wasn't structured. And I never ran out of things to talk about either, by the way, never did. But ultimately, after a while, as you have changes in your life, you know, and as you realize that, you know, you want to do other things in your life, structuring has to be in play so that things can simply just get done. You know, it kind of be like a case where, like, let's say that you want to go out and do a photo shoot, you know, so you go out and do a photo shoot, but you never post-process the photos so that you can, you know, add them to your gallery, and you decide instead just to go out and do a photo shoot the next day, and then, you know, go out and do another photo shoot the day after that, and so on and so forth. And the reason why you never end up there we go, can't talk here. The reason why you never end up post-processing your photos is because all you want to sit up here and do is shoot, and you never want to sit down at the computer, or you never want to do an in-camera post-process for those who use Samsung Pentax, you know what I'm talking about here. And to an limited extent, you know, Fuji. But you never want to, you know, post-process your photos simply just due to the fact that, all you're wanting to do is shoot, and you talk about that one day when you'll get to those photos. Like, everybody knows that person. You know, everybody knows that one day person. Like, oh, one day I'll get to post-processing the photos. One day I will. And of course they never do. Or by the time they do, they end up in what is like, you know, in terms of their, photography, I'd like to say like a midlife crisis, because they got all these photos and they don't know, you know, what to do. Hence, you know, just think of people who have film cameras and they, you know, the whole like slides and negatives and that whole business. And people are like, oh, you know, how do I sit up here and, you know, get my slides or my negatives onto a computer? You know, and you're looking at them when they're asking you about this stuff, and you're thinking to yourself, dude, it's like 2016. What the hell are you talking about? Or it might have been 2015 or 2014 or 2013 or 2012. I don't know. But the point is, to what I'm saying is that, you're looking at them like, you know, bro, you kind of look at, you're somewhere in the ages of 60 to 80. Okay. I know you're of a previous generation, and, you should have taken care of this a long time ago, you know, but that's people for you. That's people for you. So, yeah, you shouldn't be surprised about that kind of stuff, or at least I'm not surprised about it. But, you know, to the point of basically what I'm driving home here is that, you got to be structured in terms of your podcasting in the same way you got to be structured in terms of your photography, in the same way you got to be structured in terms of your sleeping schedule and your work schedule and so on and so forth. It all just plays like that, you know. So I realized yesterday that, you know, the episode was the episode with the censor, and now we get to jump on to, sorry, what I'm really wanting to talk about, which is, the issue at hand, with Samsung, which we'll get into here in a second. Now, one other thing I do want to address is some people are going to go, you know, why is it you record in 32-bit audio when everybody else, they're running around and they're recording in, you know, 128 or 320-bit, you know, audio? Why is it that you do, you know, the whole, you know, 32? And the reasoning for it, and it's kilobits, by the way. But the reasoning for it is, I really, after doing podcasting for so long, I've learned staying with a consistent, you know, bit rate is the best way to do things. So some people are going to listen to this and they're going to think, wow, is he just, you know, recording off of a tape recorder? No, the answer is I'm not. I'm actually recording off of a high audio device, but one of my things is that I have learned that when you have to resample things so many times, you sometimes have to go back and ask yourself, why do I have to resample it? You know, and sometimes you do want to give the best of something, which in this case, I'd like to give a higher, you know, level of audio quality and stuff like that. But the fact is, I deal so much with podcasting, and I deal so much with audio recordings and stuff like that. Like, for example, sometimes, you know, I'll have to record an audio for like an hour to an hour and a half long and then drop it in someone's email box. Like, I'll have to do something like that. So this is why I have a lower, you know, bit rate of audio recording than I want to say some of the other people out there you might listen to. And it's just my preference. It's what I like to do. I have come to learn that sounding the best necessarily doesn't always matter, because in the end it goes in one ear out the other, and it's the content that actually makes the difference, not necessarily the way it sounds. So I'm pretty practical at this point about these kind of things. And this might also help you to understand why I feel the way I do about, you know, Samsung and their BSI sensor. It's because I'm very practical in nature, you know, and I do think that their 20 megapixel BSI sensor is an excellent sensor. Now, I don't necessarily believe it's the best sensor on the market, and that's something that I want to get out of the way too before we get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation that we're going to have here. But I do believe that it is a great sensor. I do believe that Samsung has been underrated by a lot of reviewers out there, which honestly, I when it comes to reviewers, most reviewers don't even know what the hell they're talking about. They don't. I'll be honest about it. I'm going to be totally honest about it. They don't know what they're talking about. I've watched people review shit for literally, we will say, years upon years upon years. And if you actually go and look at their pros and cons on their reviews, like they'll be like, this here has great image quality, does good in low light. And then, you know, and that's the pro. Then you go and look at the con. ISOs are really noisy. Has poor autofocus in low light. And then you're thinking, what on earth was this person talking about? They literally were talking out of both sides of their mouths. And the reason why you run into this is because in most cases, a lot of these reviewers are quote unquote they're bought and sold. That's what it is. They're bought and sold, you know. They want to have the inside track. They know if they sit up here and say good things about a certain manufacturer or a certain camera, you know, that puts them in good graces for the inside track, yada, 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 so on and so forth. But in the end, the inside track really doesn't matter at all. It just doesn't, you know, because it doesn't change the performance of that camera. And it honestly doesn't change the fact that you went out and misled, you know, thousands of people who were willing to take stock in what you said about that camera or about that lens or about that editing software or about whatever we'd be talking about, that you misled them in, you know. And this is one of the big reasons to why I started phototheology in the first place. You know, this is one of the reasons to why I actually did it, was because way back when I was dealing with the Pentax K5, you know, I knew its performance. And here's the funny thing, I didn't even own one. You know, I just happened to, you know, I knew the camera's performance, and I had seen all these people talk about it, and I'm like, wait a second here, this just, it's not adding up. Why are all these people saying these things? And statistically, they're not true. And image quality wise, they're not true. Why is this like this? And they were all wrong. Every one of them that talked about the camera that I could think of. You know, which I'm not going to go into the names on this. I may do it one day. I'm just not going to do it now. But they were all wrong. And essentially, they were all liars. And essentially, they had no clue of what they were talking about. You know? And I'm quite sure all you got to do is simply just, you know, go watch my review on that camera. This is like the first one I ever did. And then go back and see what other people said about the camera and see how it adds up. And you're going to find that things weren't so true. In fact, most people talked about the camera, in some cases, before the camera was even out. And, you know, they tried to claim that, like, the Nikon D7000 was so much better. And it turned out not to be. Not even close. You know. But it essentially is what it is, and this is how things work. And, this is the universe in which, you deal with, digital photography. You get people who will give you bad press. And the reason why they'll give you bad press is because, honestly, they don't have a clue of what they're talking about. They really don't. It's one of those things where I guess you could sit up here and say, you got a lot of people who are good at the photography they do. And the reason why they're good at the photography they do is because they were given outlets that other individuals weren't given. My case in point is this, okay? So you have a lot of people that are great photographers, or they're claimed to be great photographers. And I would say 9 times out of 10, it's not so much they are a great photographer, it is the content that they had to photograph versus what other people have to photograph. So you take that photographer that goes to that third world country and he finds that child that's living in that third world country, playing in a pile of dust. Because that child has nothing whatsoever in terms of material possessions, in the way that, we do in a first world country. Okay. There are a lot of great scenes you can get from that kind of situation. Photographers do it all the time. Now that is a totally different scene than if I were to go to my kid's, Catholic school and photograph him playing soccer or, at a school play or something like that. And the reason for it is they both warrant 2 different types of emotions. They both have 2 different types of impacts. And they both have 2 totally different types of settings. One is drastically more dramatic. One is more, I guess you could say, uplifting. But it may only be uplifting to those who are at the event at the time versus, the kid in the Dust Bowl. Anybody can feel for that child in the third world country. It doesn't mean that the photographer who did those pictures was a better photographer. It just means that he had better content than what I would have had in a comparable situation. Which is technically, I guess, beyond the fact that you're photographing kids, not really a comparable situation. But I digress. So when you talk about photographers, when you talk about reviews, and when you talk about the content that they give out and stuff like that, you got to be very, very careful in the way that you examine stuff. Because a lot of times the people who you think know things really don't know anything, And in many cases, people who don't know anything actually have a lot to say. The people who you'd believe wouldn't know anything. They actually have the most, valid point to the conversation. Case in point. Now, in my case, yes, I know quite a bit about photography. And in my case, yes, I know quite a bit about cameras and systems and stuff like that. I deal with it all day long. I'm saying that as a person who can call essentially, bullshit on someone who's talking about something and they just don't know what they're talking about. And I do find it amazing sometimes also when I'm looking in the comments below for some of my older stuff. And I listen to what people say and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you're saying that, but there's nothing that actually proves that. And that's one of the key things to photography. Like, seeing is believing. Like, you can sit up here and say a camera has a superior ISO performance to another camera, but if you can't prove it, it doesn't matter. You just can't get on someone's, YouTube channel or go to someone's website and then post, well, I think this camera here has a better ISO range. And then there's no proof on earth whatsoever. And in my case, in the way that I look at stuff, if I'm going to sit up here and claim that a camera has better ISO performance, or if I'm going to claim a camera has better this, that, or the other, you damn well better believe I'm going to prove it. That's what I'm going to do, because that's what I ought to do, because I was willing to open up my mouth and say something. And in some cases also, with photographers, what you end up getting is a situation where they want to do reviews. And in wanting to do reviews, what you have is they review a whole bunch of cameras, right? And they'll say, we found the Nikon to be this, we found the Canon to be that, we found the Pentax to be that. And they never show you a single picture. All you do is simply watch them do a test, which is not even really a test, where somebody's walking up and down a sidewalk and they're taking pictures. And then after that, they're like, we found the Nikon to be generally a little more noisy than the Pentax. And we found that the Canon's autofocusing couldn't keep up with the Nikons or the Pentexes. But we found also this, that, and the other. And you're thinking to yourself, so where are the published results? Like, where are the published results at? Seriously, where are they at? You sat up here and said all these things, but you don't have the published results to prove them. Again, you have to think about those kind of things. Whenever someone starts talking about they know something about cameras, or they claim they're doing a review on the camera, you have to look at the published results of what they are. And more importantly than that, the results should be reduplicatable. Someone should be able to reduplicate the results that they have. And if they can't do it, then obviously those results really don't matter that much, because it could have been a bummed out camera model, or it could have been that, the photographer / the reviewer was just sheerly incompetent. It could be because they don't deal with that camera system all that often. Their competency level just is not there in the way that it would be with a, shall we say, experienced person with that kind of camera, which automatically elevates the person who normally uses that camera to, I would say a high level of competency. But, to that point of what we're talking about here, again, scrutiny is the main piece here that we're going after. It is the scrutiny factor. So I throw that out there because I believe that everyone should be skeptical of camera review sites. Everyone should be skeptical of them, and they should be skeptical of all reviewers, because 9 times out of 10, reviewers are wrong. They typically are. And they're wrong for 1 to 10 reasons. Maybe it's just one reason why they're wrong, or maybe it's all 10. And don't get me wrong about how I feel about it. It is okay. It's okay to be wrong on some things. Like if you're doing a full camera review and maybe you're technically wrong about, the autofocusing speed of a camera. Okay. Because you decided to incorporate AF speed, shutter lag, and, a host of other factors. And you say, this is what we found the autofocusing speed to be. But you didn't, break down the focusing systems between, is it a single focus, a continuous focus? You didn't break down the, luminance of the situations that you had in your controllable, parameters and whatnot. I get that. Okay. Sometimes those mistakes happen. And that's why you have multiple review sites, and that's why you don't have one review site. Because literally, if you took the time to review a camera, from top to bottom, from A to Z, to 1 to infinity, you'd be there forever reviewing that camera, and nothing would ever get done. So you gotta cut corners somewhere in order for, obviously something to work. But what I never really find as acceptable is I don't find where people do a review where they go grab a camera and they record themselves using the camera. They talk about, the feel of the camera. They go, oh, this camera feels so great. Da 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 da. And here you are sitting down and watching, the video of it, and you're thinking to yourself, what difference does it make for how the camera feels if it's not in my hand? Because everybody has a different acquired taste when it comes to ergonomics. Hence, that's why manufacturers build certain cameras in certain ways. And hence why manufacturers, even within a legacy model, what they'll do is they'll redesign the grip because they thought the first grip was the way people wanted it. They find out that their demographics change for the camera, and they believe that the new grip is the way people want it, so on and so forth, based on feedback. So, ergonomics in and of themselves, when you see people on, YouTube or on their review sites talking about, hey, this is how a camera feels and it feels great. You look at them and you kind of think to yourself, yeah, that was a complete waste of time. That was. But if you're going to sit up here and talk about the core benefits of the construction and design and the materials that go into the camera, I would say that's a little different there, just to be fair about it. But those are the kind of things that you got to look at. You know, it's the things that really make sense versus the things that really don't make sense in terms of review. And then how does that play out? Now, why did I just go into all of this? Because quite frankly, I could do a whole episode on this, which I will do a whole episode on this later on down the line. But the reason why I brought all that up was simply because that deals with Samsung. Like, that kind of stuff deals with Samsung. It does. Samsung is by far, I would say at this point in time, they are basically the most underrated camera out there. I would totally say that. In comparison to Canon, in comparison to Nikon, in comparison to Pentax, in comparison to Olympus, Panasonic, Sony, dare I even say Sigma. People are going to be like, what, Sigma makes cameras? Yeah, they make cameras. Leica, you name it. Yes, Samsung is the most underrated camera out there. Now, why are they the most underrated camera out there? Well, there are a number of reasons why they are the most underrated camera that is out there on the market. There are a number of reasons. And, you know, you can build one of the best camera systems in the world in terms of the design of the camera, which is their NX model series, in terms of the NX500 and the NX1. But also you can build one of the best sensors in the world, which is their, 28 megapixel BSI sensor, which is like the jack of all trades. Like, it can essentially, from a 3200 ISO going forward, hang with the best sensors currently out on the market. It can, as long as it's 24 megapixels and below. Samsung can really hang with it. And, I tip my hats off to them. I do. But that's not enough. Building a great camera and having the most flexible sensor out on the market is just surely not enough. And Samsung even has one of the best imaging processors out on the market too. Okay, which I'm not getting into that. Okay, I could be there all day talking about imaging processors. We're not going to do that. That's a story for a different day. But they have one of the best imaging processors out there. And in fact, they have arguably the best 4K performance out there for video recording among cameras at this point in time. Panasonic being number 2. And then Sony, I would give number 3. And keep in mind, I am talking about image quality factored in with focusing, factoring in with lens selections and the lens selection and stuff like that. And I arguably might say, if you really want to hit hard on lens selection, we might as well give it to Panasonic and not Samsung. But Samsung, I'm still going to say for the sake of the conversation, it's a compatible number 1, number 2 slot between Panasonic and Samsung. But just straight surface image quality right out of the box for the money that you're going to spend, the Samsung should be able to overtake the Panasonic. It should be able to. Which, at a later point in date, we will talk about Samsung video and Panasonic video in terms of 4K, by the way. And you guys are really going to get a fun thing with that. But all those things are simply just not enough for Samsung. And there are some reasons why. And these are the kind of things you got to think about when you're investing in a company when it comes to, manufacturing a camera. So for Samsung right now, their big dilemma is this. They're pulling out of Germany, and they may end up pulling out of more, shall we say, Germanic speaking markets. They may be doing that. And the reason to why I specifically am citing Germanic speaking markets, meaning, countries that use a Germanic dialect, is because you really have to understand that Samsung is being faced with something that doesn't really happen that often when it comes to manufacturers and, product assortment and selling regionally. But it's something that Samsung realizes they cannot overcome at this point in time. They just can't do it. And it deals with primarily the fact that they went into the, European market. They thought that they were going to do well, and with the NX1 and the NX500, and their sales have just essentially just declined, season after season after season after season, or quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter, however you want to look at it. The sales have just been dismal. They've been bad. And Samsung decided, okay, we're pulling out of the German market. Now, a lot of people have, for whatever weird reason, cited this as oh no, Samsung is totally, leaving the camera arena. They're getting out of the camera business. It's over. They're not going to be able to go forward with, who and what they are in terms of a manufacturing and their marketing ideas and stuff like that. And, I read some of this sometimes online, and I think to myself, who the hell comes up with this stuff? Samsung didn't say this. Just someone wanted to throw some crap out there to fill up their webpage for a day for people to come in and, basically visit their site. So they just made some random shit up. That's what they did. Where if you know anything about the photography world, there is content for every single day of the year. There arguably is probably content for every single day of the hour, depending on if you just want to publish that content or not. But there's content out there. And when I read these kind of things, I'm kind of like, what on earth are these people? These people are just making stuff up. Like, where on earth do these people come from? They're literally just making stuff up. Now keep in mind when this rumor started, no one even knew they were being pulled out of Germany, that they were pulling out of Germany. They didn't know that. Nobody knew that as a fact. Samsung finally came out and said it, but no one knew it. So really, it was all speculation. And Samsung decided, hey, you know what? We're pulling out of the German market. We're going to do that. And a lot of people have taken this as a sign as, oh, well, they're going to pull out of every single market. And no. They're strong. Their sales were pretty decent in the U.S. They were pretty decent in the U.S. In the Korean market, that's a totally different market. And we'll get into that here in a little bit, in terms of the markets. But, they're pretty decent in the, Korean market. Samsung is a pretty decent selling camera manufacturer. They are. Their problem, though, what is their problem? Why did they have to pull out of the German market? And I think that that's the fair thing to talk about here today. Why did they have to pull out of the German market? Well, it comes down to this. Part of it is this, is that Samsung just gets, in many cases, bad press. They do. Samsung is basically where Pentax was back with their K5 and their essentially their K5 II. Okay, where they've come out with a camera that in their standing market of relevance, meaning the market of today, all right, for the time that the cameras are being made, for the NX1 and the NX500, they're not getting the due respect that they should be getting from a camera manufacturing standpoint. Like, for example, go read a review on a Nikon D7200, and then go read a review on a Samsung NX1. Then go look at the image samples and stuff like that. And people will rant and rave about the Nikon D7200 in the way that they similarly rant and they raved about the Nikon D7000 in the way that they ranted and raved about the Nikon D7100 in the way that they would about a 7000. So basically you can go 72, 71, 7000, look at what people say, it's pretty much the same crap all over again. It's regurgitated. Like, half the time I think when I sit up here and look at the, Nikon D7000 based reviews, or I look at the 5,000 base reviews or the 3,000 base reviews, it's basically the same old regurgitated nonsense. That's what it is. Because everybody says the same crap as they did before, but the expectations never increase over time, which is part of the lack of, I want to say, reality that is grounded in, camera reviews. So if one camera is built back in 2012 and it's now 2016, for its replacement model, or for its third generation, iteration from the time that it was first introduced in 2012, then you have to look at yourself and say, okay, well, what has changed in the camera market? What are now considered to be the status quos? How has the, camera consumer, viewed the changes in the camera market? And does this camera live up to those expectations? And in a lot of cases, you don't get that kind of thinking when you get these reviews. What you get is, it's a review based off of the review before. That's what you get. So, if it was a great review in the beginning with the 7000, then you can imagine when you get to the 7200, it's going to be a great review then. Simply because they're only basing it off of, technically, the 7100, because it's going to be a lazy review. And that's that. So see where I'm going with this, okay? Which is, you started with the 7000, you said that was a good camera. You didn't look at the technological advancements and then place them into the current market of the time. So you gave the 7000 a pass. When you get to the 7100, and we're talking Nikon here, by the way, for all three of these models. Again, what do? You base the 7100's review off of the 7000's review. That's what you do. And when you do that, you say these are the upgrades. And again, that camera gets a pass because you're not comparing that camera to other cameras within the market for what consumers want in terms of capability and things like that, so on and so forth. And then once when you get to the 7200, it's the same old story. It gets a pass because it was based off of the review of the 7000. But it's not based off of the idea of what is currently relevant in the current camera market. So what happens is this, is a company like Samsung comes along and they say, hey, you know what? We're going to build a camera. That's what we're going to do. We're going to build a camera, and our camera is going to shoot like 15 frames a second. Our camera is going to have Bluetooth. It's going to have, NFC, near field communication, where you can literally just tap your phone up to your camera and you're able to download all your pictures and videos from your camera to your phone. We're going to give your camera the ability to do a remote link up to your phone where you can actually control your camera from your phone. And when you take a picture on the camera, not only will it take a picture on the camera, but it will automatically save to the phone. We'll treat it as a remote switch. We're also going to give you, over 200 autofocusing points of phase detection across the entire, field of view. They're not going to be centered, but we're talking the entire field of view. We're also going to give you up to a -4 exposure. Now, when we talk about autofocusing here, I want to leave that alone here for a moment with the Samsung. I don't want to get into that kind of conversation right now. But, the whole point is the Samsung has the ability to see up to a -4, sensitivity in low light. So you have that. And then, of course, it can record in ultra high definition. It can record in 4K. And then on top of that, the camera has the ability to shoot at a 28 megapixel, resolution, which if you lower it down to 24, then it has full frame performance. And we could go on and on and on about the Samsung's capability. We could talk about its rugged body. We could sit up here and talk about, the fact that the unit is able to track its subject matter as it moves across the frame without panning. We could talk about, face detection. We could also talk about how the camera has auto intelligence, how you can literally hold the camera up and it will see what you're trying to take a picture of, and it will select the appropriate mode for that scene. We could go as far as talk about superior auto intelligence, where the camera, and I believe they call it advanced auto intelligence, but anyways, or auto intelligence plus. And technically their term is smart mode. I should actually get that out there. So they use what's called their smart mode plus, all right? Where not only does the camera choose the appropriate scene mode, but what it also is able to do is it's also on top of that able to incorporate the proper color type or the proper, I want to say, exposure capabilities and stuff like that. In other words, there's a lot of cool things that the camera's able to do, and that's in the auto mode. That is in the auto mode. Now, I would say in the camera market, about a good 80% of cameras out there now currently have an auto intelligence mode. That's what Sony actually calls it, is auto intelligence. Or they have a smart mode, or they have a scene recognition mode. That's what Fuji calls it, so on and so forth. But most of your cameras out there actually have it. Keep in mind, everything I just said runs $1,100 for this camera. Everything I just mentioned. $1,100. Now, let's go compare it to a Nikon D7200 for the sake of this conversation, which is also body only $1,100. So Nikon D7200 is 11 megapixels. I'm sorry, not 11 megapixels. What am I talking about? It is 24 megapixels. So the Samsung beats it there on resolution. However, we've already had the conversation. The Samsung is going to do better at a 24 megapixel downscale than it would at a 28. So regardless, the Samsung is going to blow it out the water. Dynamic range wise, the Samsung buries the Nikon D7200. There's no comparison whatsoever. Frame wise, the Samsung shoots at 15 frames a second. Where's the Nikon D7200? I'm going to let you guys look that one up for yourselves. Okay? Because it wouldn't even sound fair if I mentioned it. That's how poor it is. Autofocusing points. Let's get serious here. The Nikon, no matter how many autofocusing points they cram into that camera, all right, on that 7200, they're all centralized, which is the problem. They're all centralized. They're not across the entire frame. And no, it doesn't hit anywhere near 200. Okay? You talk about recording capabilities. Let's just say Nikon's going to have a hell of a fight dealing with ultra high definition coming up here in the near future. And when you start talking about Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC, they don't have the same kind of connectivity that Samsung's got going on. Okay, they just don't. So we can leave it at that. And auto intelligence, which is my main thing, which has been out for a while now. Auto intelligence. Does the Nikon have auto intelligence? The hell to the no. It does not. Now listen, I'm not trying to bash on the Nikon 7200. I'm saying this is how much this camera lacks in terms of how much more the Samsung NX1 has to offer. Okay, just based on its merits alone. And we all know that the Samsung has a better image than the Nikon D7200 has. So even there, no one can even make an argument. But this is my point to what I'm going after here. Okay, which is when you look at reviews, and when someone sits up here and rates the Nikon D7200 like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, or they give it a rating of like, out of 100%, they give it a rating of like, 85% or something stupid like that. You got to ask yourself, where is the competency of these people? And have they even looked at the other cameras out on the market? This is one of the issues that Samsung runs into. The quick comparison I just did right there. And the reason why I did not throw out the Nikon facts is this. When you listen to this audio, I want you to get online and I want you to find those facts out for yourself. You go and read what Nikon lists on their website for their main features, then go to Samsung's website and look at what they list for their features in their NX1. You make the comparison yourself. You're going to find something out there. Heck, some of you who might have already bought an Nikon D7200 after this audio of listening to it, you might end up returning it for the Samsung NX1. I don't know. But it's not just that. We could talk about the Canon 70D. And I could throw the same thing out there. The Canon 70D is supposed to be one of the greatest cameras that you can currently get. That's the claim. And I sit up here and look at it and think to myself, in what way? It shoots 7 frames a second. Okay, that's nice. The Samsung still shoots, what is it? Oh, 15 frames a second. You know, oh, it's 20 plus megapixels. Okay, well, that's nice. The Samsung's 28 megapixels. You know, and we could go on and on. But the point is that no, the Canon 70D would never be able to match the Samsung, even with their dual pixel focus autofocusing system that they ripped off from Fuji. That whole thing there, we'll talk about that one day too. But you can talk about the Canon 70D. No, there's no way on earth that for $1,100 you are going to get anything from Canon or Nikon that's going to come close. Is going to come close, and the key word is close to the Samsung NX1. But you would know that if you sat up here and looked at people in their reviews. Because what they don't do is they don't put into perspective what the Samsung system is for the money that they charge for the camera versus what other cameras are in the market. They don't do that. And look, Samsung's not the only one here. We're just talking about them today because it's very relevant to what we're going after. So to begin with, Samsung has a crazy robust system. They do. They have a crazy robust system, okay? Let's just put it this way. Samsung is the jack of all trades. I would say their camera, realistically at this point in time, is the jack of all trades. The only camera that's coming close to that thing in terms of its overall performance is the Panasonic GH4. That is it. Otherwise, we can just chalk it up and say it's not happening. Okay? And that's including the 4K video aspect. But I will also say, because of the reviews that the camera gets that are unfair to the camera, because what they don't do is they don't proportionalize the camera's relevance. They don't proportionalize the camera's relevance in the market versus other like models, either based on price point or based on capabilities. They don't do this. It ends up being the jack of all trade, but the master of none. Because no one wants to compare it to another camera. And again, the reason why they don't is because most people who do camera reviews are bought and sold by either brand loyalty or by brands themselves. Meaning that, when that next new camera comes out, I want to get the inside scoop, yada, 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 so on and so forth, and all this other stuff. Of course, those things are becoming more and more irrelevant because what a lot of reviewers do is they simply wait for the dude to get the inside story, and then they simply just get the information from him and then post it up on their page, and then that's that. So you see how this goes. It's kind of like a waste of time. But you end up in a situation where Samsung doesn't get the kind of press that they need, and this really hurts. Samsung from just a press standpoint, and this is, and understand, press is different from marketing. Okay. Samsung, I would say, is not that great at marketing when it comes to cameras, but the press is just not fair. The reviews are just not fair. And you then, you take all that the marketing is very weak for the camera, and then you take the press that isn't really great for the camera either. You take those two things, and then you put them into a Germanic market. You put them into a Germanic market. Now, some of you may be asking, why does he keep saying Germanic? Well, there's a reason why I keep saying Germanic. Because this is the market where you're going to find your Sigmas. This is your market where you're going to find Leica. This is your market where you're going to find Zeiss. This is the market where it is homegrown and bred. Now, from a German market, it's really simple. They look at Samsung and they basically laugh. They do. They look at it and they say, yeah, okay, so the Koreans have made a camera. Why do we care? I mean, who's going to buy a Korean-made camera? And there's a lot of validity to the way they think about this. You got to understand that, like, when it comes to photography and when it comes to the Germans, you start talking about brands like Leica, Zeiss, Schneider. You start talking about those brands. Those are some of the most heavy-hitting brands out there. They are. Or you start talking about just the German market, and you get into stuff like that. It's heavy hitting stuff. I mean, like that. People talk about Canon and Nikon thinking they're the best brands out there. Like, a lot of people think, for example, Nikon makes the best lenses out there. Far from the truth. You go put a Leica up against a Nikon, and you will just watch that Nikon lens implode up against the Leica. Like, the Leica will utterly destroy. It will annihilate anything in Nikon's assortment. Because they're that much of a higher end manufacturer. And you do have essentially a regional play here, where at the bottom, Korean manufacturers are considered to be, well, I take that back. Chinese manufacturers would be at the bottom when it comes to camera manufacturing. Then you would have Korean manufacturers. Then you would have Japanese manufacturers. And then you would have German manufacturers. German manufacturers are considered to be at the top. They are. Now, you got to be listening, or in this case, you got to listen to what I'm saying here. Okay, you got to be listening to what I'm saying. And what I'm saying here is that when you look at that tier, okay, your Chinese are at the bottom. Then you got the Koreans. Then you got the Japanese, and then you got the Germans. Just use the common sense. Use the common sense here. If you are a Korean manufacturer, but you're already a notch below the Japanese manufacturer in terms of perception and performance, then what hope on earth do you have going into an A-grade market, which is a German market? It would make no sense. It just doesn't make sense. You're throwing product away because they're not going to buy the product. They don't care about the product. The only thing they're going to do is crap on the product and call it a day. That's what's going to happen. And that's basically what did happen. But it happened for two main reasons that I would say that we're going to get into here now. The first thing is this, is it happened because of, like I've already stated, the press and the reviews. The Samsung NX1 did not get great press. It doesn't get it. The press and the marketing. The Samsung NX1 just did not get great press from camera reviewers and stuff like that. It didn't. And again, because it wasn't proportionalized to the performance of the camera, which is what I got to keep going after here. It's not proportionalized to the performance of the camera, to the relationship, to where it stands in the market. Had it been proportionalized, it would be a different story. So you're going to get people who sit up here and say, well, Doug, DP Review said this and Digital Imaging Resource said this. They gave it decent reviews, so on and so forth. They've got articles of people saying how great of a camera it is. That is true. But what they're not saying is, hey, this thing kicks the Nikon D7200's ass. Or, hey, this thing here, image quality, owns the Canon 70D unit in their lineup, or within Canon's lineup, or this thing owns the Canon 7D Mark II in terms of its image quality, yada yada yada, so on and so forth. Okay, so they don't relate it to what it should be. And a great example of this is going to be the Nikon D500 when it comes out. The Nikon D500 when it comes out is going to run $2,000. I believe that's body only. And when that camera comes out, it's going to be shooting 10 frames a second and shooting 4K. There are only two other cameras that are going to compete with it within the market, and that will be the Samsung NX1 and the Nikon GH4. Those three cameras. But what will happen is the Nikon's going to get a pass, and people will sit up here and claim that it is a faster camera, a better performing camera, and all this other stuff, when in reality, knowing how things normally trend, the Panasonic and the Samsung are going to, blow past the Nikon. I'd almost bet on it. So, yeah, you've got the press, and then you've got, of course, the marketing of the camera, and that just, it's really hurt the NX lineup at this given point in time. Across the board. And Samsung's marketing has not helped them whatsoever. I mean, Samsung just has some of the shittiest marketing that you could possibly find when it comes to cameras. And the reason to why they have the crappy marketing that they have is due to the fact that, well, just to put it bluntly, Samsung doesn't know how to go after the photographer market. They just don't. They want to equate it to phones, and you can't do that. You have to understand that you're building a camera. You're not building an electronical piece. Sound like one of my kids, electronicals. An electronic. You're not building an electronic. You're building a camera, and you have to talk about it as a camera. And they're not good at doing that. And that's part of what their problem is. And the other problem that they have is that from a marketing standpoint, when they market their stuff, they need photographers to talk about their cameras. They don't need to talk about them. Let the photographer do the talking. Market some photographers, for the love of God. Market some. It will help you out quite a bit. And find photographers who own Canon and Nikon gear that are willing to ditch their gear for the Samsung gear. Find that, because the proof is in the pudding right there. If you can create a synthetic photographer base for yourself, and heaven knows Samsung has enough money to do it. If you can create a synthetic photographer base yourself, where maybe you just give them, you just give them the gear and say, here, you use this. We'll take your Samsung or your Canon gear, your Nikon gear, or whatever gear you have previously. Maybe it's Panasonic. I don't know. You find that, then you got your silver bullet. When people start seeing photographers switch over to Samsung and ditching their older gear, that's when you've got a winning piece there. But Samsung's not that smart. They don't do that kind of stuff. Their whole thing is to sit in a room, develop some shit in a lab, and then say, here we go. We got it made now. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, obviously you need to develop product. You need to develop sensor technology, yada, 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 so on and so forth. I get all that, and I'm down with it. But I'm saying you got to sell it too. It's not enough to develop something. You got to sell it. And in the way that you sell it, the easiest way for Samsung to do it is to gain the momentum of established photographers that they're able to essentially create a synthetic base of photographers that eliminate their older gear and pick up Samsung gear as their new gear. That's how it really ought to work. That would make a ton of sense. And that's the way that I would do it, provided, I worked in Samsung marketing. That's the way I would go about stuff. But, you got that from the marketing end, which is a huge problem. And the thing that I need to point out with that is that if they would have done that, they also would have fixed a lot of the quirks in terms of firmware updates and stuff like that. Because the photographers would have said, this is what's wrong here, this is what's wrong here, this is what's wrong here. And Samsung would have said, we got to fix these things before we roll it out. That makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. Yeah, that all that stuff would have been fixed too. And then on top of that, you have your second issue. Okay? And dare I say it, we all know the white elephant in the room, or the pink elephant in the room, or whatever color elephant the elephant's going to be in the room, is the lenses. Yes, it is the lenses. It is the lenses. That is Samsung's second biggest problem. So, anybody who knows about Samsung as a manufacturer knows that Samsung has a very interesting relationship when it comes to camera bodies and lenses. In the very beginning, Samsung primarily used Schneider. That's what they were known for when it came to lenses. So again, think of this Korean manufacturer, and now think of the German market, and think of Schneider. Now, everybody knows that Schneider is Germanic in terms of, in terms of dialect. Everybody knows that, so you shouldn't be surprised about what that is. But Samsung went to German manufacturers and said, listen, we need you to build our lenses for our cameras because we can't sell them otherwise. So the Schneider name, in great respect, was able to carry Samsung in the way that Leica carries Panasonic. So when somebody actually says, Doug, how do you sit up here and rate the Chinese the lowest, the Koreans number 3, the Japanese number 2, and the Germans number 1? Well, it's simple. In the way it works, the Japanese and the Koreans go to the Germans to get their lenses made. That's how it works. They're not making their own stuff, for the most part, when they want to market their stuff. And especially when they want to market it, abroad. That's basically how it works. Like, for example, Sony. Let's talk about Sony for a moment. Sony goes to Zeiss. That's who they go to. Now, they do have a handcrafted Konica Minolta lens, which is their G lens. But Sony goes to Zeiss. That's who they go to. Primarily as their highest end lens, if you're not talking about the handcrafted Konica Minolta lens. You talk about Panasonic. Who does Panasonic go to? They go to Leica. Olympus. Olympus makes their own lenses, but they use a micro four thirds mount, which means you can use Leica, and I could go on and on. Now, granted, your legacy, big brands like Canon and Nikon, they make their own lenses. They don't go to anybody for that stuff, except if you're talking like Sigma. I mean, you can talk about Sigma in that respect. Canon and Nikon have Sigma. That's what they have. But that's more of a third party. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about in relations to your Schneider or your Zeiss or your Leica. So Samsung has this relationship going on with a German manufacturer, which is Schneider. And in the way that it works with Schneider, Samsung's not the first. Kodak was using Schneider as well. So it's a pretty smart move, and it works really well for them. But ultimately, Samsung ends up getting in bed with Pentax. And when they do that to develop their I think it's their GX20 or it's their G20. It's one of the two. I can't remember now. But anyways, you got that and you got the K20D. Everyone bought the K20D because it was made by Pentax. Samsung, which had the exact same camera, nobody bought that. Although it was a cool looking camera, just nobody bought it. And in that situation, Samsung did something very odd. They said, here, we're not going to have Schneider lenses. We're going to go with Pentax lenses. So this was like the first time when Samsung actually broke away from Schneider and said, we're going to do it on our own with Pentax. And yeah, Pentax, I would say, got a lot out of it. Samsung, not so much. Not so much. And maybe it would have been a smart move, honestly, to have had Schneider produce some of the lenses for the K20D body style. Just saying. So, as time goes on, what happens is Samsung goes back to Schneider, and, they're doing their thing with them. And then finally, in around, I want to say, for some reason, I want to say it's 2012. It might be 2010, but I think it's 2012. I'd honestly have to check. Samsung comes out with their like NX100, their NX10, models, and basically they're the mirrorless models. Like, these are the first Samsung, models that they come out with that are mirrorless. And, like, honestly, the models, they suck. They suck. They're bad. They're like 15 megapixel models that really blow. Now, I will say this. Samsung was at the forefront of mirrorless technology like nobody else. If you're talking about like Wi-Fi capability and cool things like that, they were strong in those areas. Plus, they had auto intelligence and all those other cool things that I mentioned. But the problem was they really didn't have speed going for them. And in addition to that, their noise control was just, you could tell it was a Samsung. It was bad. In comparison to Panasonic and Sony, Sony's NX units vastly superior to everybody else when it came to noise control. Panasonic functionality-wise, vastly superior to everybody else when it came to functionality. And then you had Olympus. And quite frankly, I think in the overall scheme of things, now looking back on it, the Olympus was probably the best balanced right out of the gate. It was. But Samsung went through, reiterations of the NX lineup, and basically what had happened was this, Samsung. Their cameras stunk so badly. They were just so pathetic that the only way Samsung could get around doing what they were doing was essentially to develop lenses that were equivalent to Canon L glass or your higher end Nikkor lenses, but at, I want to say, entry level consumer price points. That's basically how it happened. In the beginning of compact SLRs, Samsung was a much weaker brand than everybody else from a camera standpoint. But what they did that was really smart was they said, listen, you know what? Between me and you, we know we blow. We know we blow, and we blow it big. But our lenses are arguably the best on the market. Now, this sounds all fine and good. Okay, this sounds all fine and good except for one thing. You got Panasonic. And who does Panasonic use? Leica. You see where this is going now, right? You see where this is going. So you have this situation where you have Samsung and you have Leica, okay, producing these really high grade lenses. And I know we're pushing Olympus off to the side here. For those of you who like Olympus, I'm sorry, we're going to just push them off to the side, for a moment. But you have Panasonic and you have Leica producing these, compact, SLR lenses, or these mirrorless lenses that they're the real deal. They're the real deal. I mean, these lenses are amazing. And one of the big advantages of a mirrorless market is that the mirrorless market was able to essentially redefine. It was able to, for all practical purposes, redefine the whole outlook on glass. So for example, when Fuji hit the scene with their Fuji X Pro 1, the Fuji X Pro 1, when they quote unquote bundled a lens with the camera, it was a $700 lens retail. Fuji decided that their main lens was going to be an 18 to 55 f2.8 to, I believe it was f4, lens. And that lens is pretty damn sharp. It's an amazing lens, but it's a $700 lens. And that's how Fuji was able to maintain themselves through the market. So a lot of your earlier mirrorless based manufacturers, what they would do is they would put or have as an option high grade L glass lens quality at a entry level price point. Now for Samsung, I would say it starts off at roughly about $300. In other words, you can look at their 30 millimeter, which is amazing. Or you can look at their 45 1.8 millimeter, again, amazing. And you can get them around $300 usually. They even have a 16 2.4 or f2.4, I should say. Again, amazing lens. But this is how Samsung was able to get through stuff. Now, on the other side of the aisle, again, you have Panasonic. Now, Panasonic mechanically is making everything work. Panasonic, had their, lightning focus, or whatever they call the thing. But anyways, I mean, this stuff was fast. Panasonic is mechanically just an astounding camera. And I remember way back in the beginning of mirrorless when I was using their cameras, I loved them. I loved them. I loved the mechanics. Their mechanics were so amazing. But there was one mistake, and here was the mistake. They didn't put high enough in glass on their camera. It's not that they didn't have it. It's that they didn't put it on there, which was a problem. Samsung did the same thing, though. That was a huge mistake. They didn't put high-end glass on the camera. Now, Samsung decided at some point that glass was important, but they had to fix the mechanics. And with the NX300, that all changed. They came out with like an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, and let me tell you, that changed the game for Samsung. It did. Granted, it wasn't like your 30 millimeter, f.2 lens. It wasn't your 45 millimeter f1.8 lens. It wasn't those, but it was a contender mechanically for Samsung. Samsung was now able to say, listen, we can autofocus like the rest of them. And the truth is, yeah, they pretty much could. They definitely could keep up there with the digital SLR. That wasn't a problem. So what you had a situation where basically it was a lens race. Panasonic had like their 20 millimeter. I believe they also had like a 30 millimeter. They had like a 42.5 millimeter. They had all sorts of cool stuff in their assortment. Okay. And these were primarily Lumix lenses, meaning they were Leica lenses that were made not in the Leica building, but in the garage, essentially, if you want to think of it like that. But they were the real deal, and they are the real deal. They're good lenses. And I would put a lot of their lenses, even though they're Lumix lenses in some cases, I would totally put them up against Canon L glass any day. I wouldn't have a problem doing that whatsoever. But Panasonic also, has like their 12 to 35 and their 35 to 100 millimeter lenses, which are just phenomenal. And you can get the 12 to 35, which is equivalent to the 24 to 70 millimeter, because they use a multiplier too. You can get that for like $1,000, and you can get the 35 to 100 for like around 1,500-1,600 or so. Compare that to Canon's like 2,500 and 2,500. It's a huge difference there. But anyways, keeping on the subject of Samsung. Samsung was developing lenses that were of Leica grade in terms of image quality and stuff like that, in terms of their actual resolution output capabilities, or more importantly than that, I want to say the sharpness / the clarity in the way that the camera was able to, through the lens, deal with contrast and stuff like that. I will say this, the Samsung lens lineup, definitely, if you're not talking about like their 55 to 200 millimeter lens or their 18 to 200 millimeter lens, basically anything that's a non 200 millimeter lens or a kit lens, is up there with the best of them at this point in time. It is. And again, you're talking about price points that are pretty doable. But Samsung even went one step further, because they learned something, I think, from Fuji, which was you better put a great lens on there when you build your damn camera. So when they came out with the NX1, what Samsung had decided to do was Samsung had decided to put, for its debut, their 16 to 50 f2 to 2.8 lens out there. And that lens is just amazing. Like, I love that lens. That is one of the best lenses, I think, on the market. And the thing is, it's value. You're only talking like, I think $1,300 at this point or something like that now. It's pretty inexpensive. But again, you got to look at this. Like, Samsung is a manufacturer that's not only building the camera, but they're building the lenses now. And their performance, their output in terms of lens optics is rivaling that of Leica. They're not the only ones though. Like, for example, Fuji does it too. But, which is a Japanese manufacturer. But when you look at Leica, when you look at Zeiss, when you look at these other manufacturers, they're not invincible. Samsung has proven that. But here's the problem with Samsung. And let's get into it. It comes down to reviews, and it comes down to marketing. It comes down to press and marketing, as I've already told you. It is the press and it's the market. And that's what killed Samsung in their Germanic market. That's what's killing them. That's why they got to pull out of Germany. That's why it didn't work. It didn't work because you can look at it in a number of different ways. Okay? You can look at it in a number of different ways. One of the ways you could look at it is essentially, if you were to purchase Samsung, it's a job killer. Like, in other words, if you purchase Panasonic, Leica is a German manufacturer, and or that's the last time I checked it was, and or Germanic manufacturer. Leica, you're basically to a degree supporting the German economy. If you buy Panasonic, to a degree, yeah, you're supporting the German economy because Leica has that relationship with Panasonic. Where if you purchase Samsung, you're not supporting the German economy whatsoever. So you got that as part one. If you want to look at the geopolitical aspects of it, I guess you could always do that. Part two, though, which is more important than that, is that market is just heavily entrenched. I haven't even brought up the fact that those people buy Leica cameras. And when you start talking about Leica cameras, you're talking about consumers that have pockets where they'll spend anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000 on a camera. That's what they'll do. And trust me, full frame isn't where they stop. They go bigger than that. And as silly as it sounds, as silly as it might sound to you, when you're listening to this, they have a much higher regard for photography. The legacy of the camera has to play into the camera in terms of its story. Meaning when you buy a Leica camera and when it's been worn and used and you look at it, that camera 9 times out of 10 has a real story behind it, where the photographer can tell you stories of how it got the nick, on the side here, or got the scratch over there, or where, the leather is beginning to wear off, over here, so on and so forth. There is a story that goes behind the camera because it is a legacy brand. And I'm not talking legacy in terms of Nikon or Canon legacy. I'm talking in terms of the craftsmanship of the camera. And that's how Leica users are in many respects. They always have a story for their camera. Trust me, I know. So you have that, you have that emotional attachment, to it. And you also have a more disciplined photographer that's there too, that Samsung just can't go after. And you got to understand, it's not that they're brainwashed, okay? Like people who own Leica or Schneider or Zeiss, they're not brainwashed individuals, okay? Unless, it's the body that just makes absolutely no sense to why they purchased it. And what I mean by that is that they sat up here and went out and bought for example, a Sony A7S, okay, like an A7S. I mean, like, or an S2. All right, yeah, obviously to some degree you're probably brainwashed if you're using that thing, but and again, that's a different topic for a different day. But again, if you're purchasing a Leica, if you're purchasing, a Leica camera or a Panasonic, which is a poor man's Leica, if you're making that purchase, the thing that you have to understand is that you are investing in that camera because of its mechanics. You're investing in the camera because of its, shall we say, optimized firmware. You're investing in the camera because the limitations of the camera are completely adequate to you in the way that you view it. And that only adds to the mystique of shooting with the camera. So understand, I'm not coming out here and saying that Leica has a better image quality than Samsung. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that if you bought a Panasonic, for example, a Panasonic Super Zoom, or if you bought the Leica equivalent to the Panasonic Super Zoom and paid 2 to 4 times as much. I'm not saying the picture quality is going to be better. What you're paying into is you're paying into the Leica experience. And that experience transitions over from Leica to Zeiss to Schneider. It transitions to all those German manufacturers. That's just how their stuff works. And it's also perceived to be built to last. And in some cases, I would say it's totally true. But in understanding all of that, it's the reason to why Samsung cannot make any headway into the Germanic market. It's why they can't do it. It's why they had to pull out. Like, what is the point of dumping, 100,000 cameras into a market that you'll be lucky if you sell 100 of in a year, when you could have taken that 100,000 and then dispersed it into other markets and gotten a true benefit, in terms of sales. So right now, Samsung is in a situation where they're looking market by market by market and saying, where does it make sense for us to actually have our cameras? And they're basically targeting certain markets because they want to optimize sales. And that makes perfect sense. That's what you want to do. Now, it could be that they've seen a decline across the board. There's a possibility of that. And in that possibility, yeah, you know what? That even makes more sense that you better sit up here and target the markets that really work for you. But that decline that they would be looking at would be a decline that would have been happening since digital cameras have basically overtaken a large portion of the photography market as well. And also what I have to point out is that for a brand like Samsung, that's a Korean brand, if you're going to build cameras, you got to stop building stupid models. That goes back to the whole press and marketing idea that I'm talking about. You don't build crappy point and shoot models. Don't do that. It makes no sense. There's no reason to do anything like that. That's just like the stupidest idea ever. You're a brand that is struggling to get your claim to fame in the SLR arena. And your whole idea is that you're going to go out and build a, crummy point and shoot, and not just one, but we'll say like 10 of them, throw them into a market, and your point and shoots are going to, aside from their cool, navigation capabilities and menu systems and social networking abilities, they're going to get utterly murdered by Sony and Canon and Nikon and everybody else. You got to know when it's worth building and when it's not worth building. And that is one of the things that I think Samsung is now starting to essentially awaken to, is that you really do have to target your markets. You really got to understand what you're going after and why you're going after it. And are you building something just to build something? Like, for example, in today's market, and I'll throw this out there, Samsung, it is true, can sit up here and build, 10 point and shoot models that are going to be total junk. Okay, they can do that. Or they can, and try selling those in a camera market. Or what they can do is just sell more Samsung Galaxy phones. Or take the resources that you would take in developing a crummy point and shoot camera and throw it into your SLR division. Or throw it into your cell phone division. You see where I'm going with this? Like, in other words, Samsung has such a huge, broad base. Like half the world is using their phones. I mean, that's pretty much how it works. Like, half the world is using their phones and the other half is using iPhones. Okay? That's that whole iOS versus Android deal. But when you're that big of a company, which they are at this point, where, essentially, we can sit up here and say half the world are using your phones. And I'm not saying that's a fact. I'm just using that as a generalization. When you come out and have that as a prospect, you don't need to sit up here and hurt your brand by building crappy little cameras. You don't need to do that. That makes no sense. Because all that does is that hurts you when someone says, here, I'm ready to invest in a bigger camera. Again, that's how it works. So there's a lot that you got to think about here with the NX1 and the NX500 in terms of their systems. You know, for people who are going to be concerned about the whole, they're pulling out of Germany, yada, 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 oh, Samsung's getting rid of their camera divisions and stuff like that. First off, they're not getting rid of their camera division. They're not going to do that. Okay, and in the next episode, I'm going to get into that. When I start talking about sensors and I start talking about, you know, Sony and Samsung and all that fun stuff. They're not going to get rid of their camera division. What they're doing is they're targeting certain demographics that they know they can win. They know they cannot win a Germanic demographic at this point in time. They can't do it. And they're not the only ones, you know, they're not the only ones. So there's no reason for them to cry about it. And they're not. They're just saying, look, you know what? We're going to exit this arena. We'll come back when we're actually ready. And Samsung is going to have to think long and hard about what does ready look like. Does it mean that we get rid of our value-based point-and-shoot cameras? Because in my opinion, yeah, they ought to. Does it mean that they shouldn't build a camera under $500? Yeah, in my opinion, they shouldn't. Does it mean that every single piece of glass that they put out there should be equivalent to the grade of a Leica or Zeiss? Yes, that's what it means to me. Yeah, that's what they ought to do. Does it mean that they should expand their assortment to cover a broader range of photographer through their lens assortment? Yep, it means that too. You know, I'm not saying Samsung needs to have 20 different models to face the whole camera arena. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is this, is that if you want to be taken seriously as a camera company, then you have to do serious things. And Samsung has begun that path. But there are things that they haven't done that they're going to have to do in order to truly become a competent camera company in the eyes of those who would own a Leica camera or who would own a Panasonic camera. There are things that Samsung's going to have to do. And one thing that I'll throw out there for what they ought to do is build a 400 millimeter lens. You got to get you got to get a 100 to 400 millimeter lens out there. Because truth be told, I don't see how you can take a camera like a Samsung NX1 that shoots, 15 frames a second. And you want to talk about like wildlife photography or sports photography, and you don't have a 100 to 400 millimeter lens to accompany that camera, to be its companion. That just makes no sense. Now, I'm going to close this down, but this is what I want to leave with you guys, okay? The first thing is this. When you're thinking about the Samsung system, you've got to think about what do you want to do, okay? And what I mean by that is this. If you're looking at portraiture, it works totally fine. If you're looking at, we'll say, commercial in terms of product, whether it's jewelry, clothing line, yada, 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 so on and so forth, totally, you're going to hit the point with the Samsung. I mean, like, they're made to do that kind of stuff. Anything commercial, they can pretty much do. If you're looking at wildlife, or if you're looking at sports, and if you need a long zoom, that's going to be their weaker point. There, I just broke it down to you. What the camera's strong at versus what it's weak at. And that's not actually based on the camera itself. It's based on its lens selection. Pretty much. So, if you're going after videography, then yes, I don't think you can do any better than Samsung at this point in time. And, you guys can, wait, in these next coming weeks you're going to see me actually come out with, quote unquote, a Samsung video compilation. So you guys can see how Samsung video stacks up against some of the other videos that you guys have seen out there. Now, of course, you could always just get on YouTube, type in Samsung NX1 video, and then you'll find stuff there. But essentially, you're going to see what I like in terms of compilation of videos and why I think the Samsung system is a great system for video. But the next episode that we're going to do, it's not so much going to be Samsung driven, because this just turned out to be a 2-part episode. And I think I've explained why Samsung had to pull out of, the German market. I think I've easily explained that, even though it took a while. But what we're going to talk about in the next episode is we're going to talk about sensors. And we're going to be talking about essentially like partly Samsung, partly Sony, and we're going to be talking about how sensors are now starting to affect the photography market. So you guys take care. I will talk to you later. All right. Bye-bye.